In 1977, British children's TV presenter John Noakes climbed Nelson's column in Trafalgar Square, wearing no more protective gear than bell-bottom jeans and a camo jacket, and presumably accompanied by a cameraman doing the whole thing one-handed.
How are the ladders fixed on?
They're
Quite firmly?
They're roped quite firmly around the actual column itself.
Noakes often did big, stunt, out-of-studio pieces like this for the BBC, and he became a household name, although he would later claim that producers had failed to insure him properly, and that sometimes risk assessments simply consisted of the words, "John may die." But Noakes didn't fall, and when he got to the top, he was able to come within hair-sniffing distance of the owner of the pediment, Admiral Horatio Nelson, looking directly down Whitehall at the Houses of Parliament. Trafalgar Square is home to statues of generals and presidents and even kings, but Nelson towers over them all. So who is this guy? And why does he get such a big fancy lookout right in the middle of London? This is a story about corpses pickled in brandy, priceless antique vases, and getting shot in the elbow. Let's get started. Working up. Horatio Nelson is born in Norfolk in 1758. He isn't born into the aristocracy, which normally you have to be if you want a high-ranking job in the Navy, but he does have one good family connection, an uncle called, hilariously, Captain Maurice Suckling, who's a bit of a war hero and tells him stories about all the heroic hijinks he got up to in the Royal Navy. So when little Horatio is 13, his uncle takes him to sea as a midshipman. It's like an apprentice officer. You're above the ordinary sailors, but at the bottom of the officer rung, hoping one day to pass your officer's exam and become a lieutenant. Some midshipmen are as young as 8 or 9. On Horatio's first voyage, there were 25 of them altogether, all boys. He sleeps in a mouldy hammock below the waterline. And he starts getting experience on a few different ships, with his uncle looking after him. According to one story, he's on this expedition in the Arctic when he sneaks off the ship, just to take a look around, and he gets into a tangle with a polar bear. He tries shooting the bear, but his powder is damp, and his gun does nothing. Luckily, at that moment, his ship fires its cannon, scaring it off. Nelson gets into trouble for sneaking ashore, but the captain also says he secretly admires the boy's bravery. And then one day, he catches malaria in India. He gets sent home. He's depressed and anxious, he's sick, the ship hits bad weather, and he has officers' exams coming up.
And the prom's tomorrow!
But suddenly, he has a vision. A radiant orb appears, and his outlook suddenly changes, as if the clouds just parted. He feels a great sense of patriotism and heroism that will stick with him his whole life. And when he recovers, he takes that officer's exam. And his Uncle Maurice is one of the examiners, so obviously he passes. And now he's a lieutenant, and he can start climbing the career ladder. One of his jobs is in the West Indies, stopping American ships from trading there. America was one of many countries we were at war with at the time. And while in Nevis, he meets Francis, or Fanny, nice, Nisbet. They like each other a lot, and they end up getting married. Nelson says, "I have not the last doubt but that we shall be a happy pair. The fault must be mine if we are not." Remember that, it might come back to bite him later. While we're in the Caribbean, it's worth mentioning that not only is Nelson pro-slavery, he also actively speaks against abolition, which he calls the damnable and cursed doctrine. It's a thing that doesn't often get mentioned, but that might change your picture of who he is. Anyway, they move back to his home in Norfolk, but Fanny is very homesick. She hates how cold and quiet Norfolk is compared to the sunny Caribbean where all her friends are. And to make things worse, one day Horatio is watching a French fortress being bombarded in Corsica, and a shell explodes near him, making him permanently blind in one eye. But that doesn't stop him from winning his greatest victory yet at the Battle of Cape St. Vincent. He manages to capture not one, but 2 Spanish ships. Spain was one of many countries we were at war with at the time. And it makes him famous. People are stopping Fanny in the street to congratulate her. He gets made a Knight of the Order of the Bath, which is a particularly fancy kind of knight. He gets one of many fancy badges he would wear in his portraits. And he gets a promotion to Rear Admiral, meaning he is put in charge of whole fleets. Since he's now pretty high up in the chain of command and blind in one eye, Fanny asks him please not to get stuck into the fighting anymore. But he doesn't listen. He's always keen to be in the thick of it, to show that he was prepared to fight alongside his men. And he becomes known for this Nelson touch, and it really does make him very popular and trusted among his fellow officers. But this comes back to bite him at the Battle of Santa Cruz de Tenerife, when he's hit in the right elbow with a musket ball. They put a tourniquet on him and get him into a boat to get back to the main ship, but on the way he keeps insisting they stop to pick up British sailors who'd gone overboard, and it takes them half an hour to get to the surgeon, and Horatio orders him to amputate. Afterwards, he says that the worst part wasn't the saw going through the bone, but how cold the knife was going through the flesh. After that, he orders all his surgeons to heat their knives before operating. If you're wondering what happened to the arm, they threw it overboard. Horatio is sure his career is over. He says a left-handed admiral will never again be considered useful. But both his commanding officer and the public consider him a hero. You can buy handkerchiefs and plates and fans with his face on. There were songs written about him. Everyone had Nelson fever. At home, Fanny is really good at cleaning his wound and changing his bandages and even cutting up his food for him at dinner. And despite what he thinks about left-handed admirals, he keeps on winning. When he wins another victory at the Battle of the Nile, the messenger who's sent to tell the king what's happened gets stopped by this highwayman, but then the robber learns about the news he's carrying and he's like, "Carry on, sir! Carry on!" And when he comes home from the Battle of the Nile, he comes home to Fanny with a lot of money that he'd got from foreign ships, a disability pension, and a woman. Lady Hamilton. Horatio has known Emma Hamilton for years, ever since he first went to Naples where she lived to meet the king. She's married to the British ambassador to Naples, William Hamilton. Now, Horatio might not have been born into aristocracy, but Emma Hamilton is properly working class. She's the daughter of a blacksmith, and her first job is at the age of 12, working as a housemaid. But at 16, a rich friend of her boss strikes up a relationship with her, and she becomes his mistress. Now, I know some kids like to watch my show, so a mistress is like a girlfriend you're not going to marry. You might send her some money or give her somewhere to live instead. Throughout history, many powerful men have had mistresses, even when they're married to someone else. Some men are quite open about their mistresses, but generally, you're not supposed to cheat on your wife, and society will judge you if they find out. So Emma is living as a mistress, which means she doesn't have to work anymore. Her rich boyfriend gives her a house and money, and she goes from boyfriend to boyfriend like this a few times until she meets William Hamilton, who marries her. She is less than half his age, and she doesn't have posh manners or lots of money or even very good spelling, but he is absolutely crazy about her. He thinks she is so beautiful that he pays for artists to come and paint her. She's especially famous for her attitudes, where she would pose as different mythological or historical characters behind a picture frame, basically a kind of living portrait, like an 18th century cosplay girl. Goethe says she gives so much variety to her poses, gestures, expressions, etc., that the spectator can hardly believe his eyes. And when Emma meets this dashing young naval hero, she's swept off her feet. When he wins the Battle of the Nile, she writes, "Never, never has there been anything so glorious. How I glory in the honour of my country and my countryman. I walk and tread in the air with pride, feeling I was born in the same land with the victor, Nelson." Horatio and Emma really fall for each other hard. And he writes Fanny some pretty tasteless letters about how great she is. "I hope one day to have the pleasure of introducing you to Lady Hamilton. She is one of the best women in the world." You might be wondering how Emma's husband is dealing with this, and it seems like he doesn't mind. Like, he basically pretends not to notice, and he never falls out with Nelson over it. Anyway, he has this collection of priceless antique vases that he's really into. By the way, while Nelson's in Naples, he isn't just having parties with Emma. In fact, he helps stop a rebellion, The rebels are defeated and promise safe passage to France, but Nelson has other ideas. He stops them on the way and hangs the man he thinks is their ringleader. He isn't. And in the end, 2/3 of the rebels are hanged, including women. The executions go on for months. Nelson says, "We are restoring happiness to the Kingdom of Naples." Again, something that doesn't often get mentioned that might change how you think about him. But in the end, they decide to flee Naples. Horatio, Emma, and William. They sail into a terrible storm. Emma's husband hides in his cabin with 2 loaded pistols, ready to shoot himself rather than drown. They eventually make it to Sicily, but he loses his priceless antique vase collection, and the news kind of breaks him. He takes to his bed, and he never really recovers. They all move to England together, with Emma's husband spending his time fishing and vase collecting. Emma and Horatio become more open about their relationship until it was basically an open secret. Sometimes they wrote to each other 4 times a day. He takes the Hamiltons home to meet Fanny in what must have been the most awkward dinner party of all time. Total strangers draw cartoons about their affair, and Emma gets pregnant. This is too much for Fanny, who separates from Horatio around this time. Somehow Emma's husband carries on pretending not to notice, although God knows how. In 1801, little Horatia is born, and they pay a woman to raise her in secret, but they could have picked a more subtle name. Horatio buys Emma and her husband a big expensive house called Merton Place, where they live in a kind of menage a trois. He and Emma have a friendship ceremony in a church where they exchange rings to celebrate their friendship. Now, while all this is going on, he's still fighting battles at sea on the regular. At the Battle of Copenhagen, which is Britain versus Denmark and Norway. Denmark and Norway were 2 of many countries we were at war with at the time. His commanding officer tells him to retreat by flag signal. But once again, Nelson is keen to get to some fighting, so he puts a telescope to his blind eye and is like, "Oh, I really do not see the signal. What are you talking about? Aren't I allowed to be blind sometimes? Well, better go into battle." Ignoring a direct order is a huge risk, but he ends up winning another great victory and becoming even more famous. And then finally, we come to the Battle of Trafalgar, the one Nelson's best known for, and the one for which the square is named. Trafalgar is part of the Spanish coastline to the south. So basically, French and Spanish ships are in port. The British are sat outside, waiting for them to leave the safety of the port. The French make a break for it, and Nelson goes after them. Now, before the battle, he puts up signal flags to his men, saying England expects that every man will do his duty. This has since become a really famous phrase, but some sailors at the time are like, "Don't we always do our duty? Jerk." As the fleet approaches, Horatio insists on wearing all his shiny medals into battle, even though it makes him really easy to spot. This is the actual jacket he wore on that day, on display in the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. During the battle, his ship, Victory, crashes into the French ship Redoutable, which just so happens to have France's best snipers on board. And he is easier to spot than Trafalgar Square at Christmas. So Horatio is shot in the shoulder. You can see a hole in the jacket where the bullet went in, and it travels through him, going right through his spine. He knows he's not got long left, so he tells his officers to put a handkerchief over his face so his men don't recognise him and panic. But he is still wearing all his shiny buttons, so I'm not sure how many people were fooled by that. He's still alive when his friend Thomas Hardy comes to tell him that the battle is won. Some people will tell you that his last words were, "Kiss me, Hardy." Men kissing friends on the cheek or on the brow wasn't as uncommon in 1805 as it is now, but some historians have no-homoed this into Kismet Hardy, which is technically a word. It's a Persian word meaning like fate or destiny, but the first entry in the Oxford English Dictionary for it is 50 years after Nelson died. Basically, teachers made it up so that classrooms of English schoolboys wouldn't snigger at this part in the story. Anyway, Horatio lives long enough to say a few more things after this. His last words have variously been recorded as, Thank God I have done my duty, God bless you, Hardy, and God and my country. Trafalgar is a great victory. The British capture 18 ships and lose none of their own. France's naval power is broken, and this is the last great battle of the era of sail. Oh, I haven't even gotten to the good bit yet. A corpse pickled in brandy. Horatio had asked for his body not to be thrown overboard, so they put it in a barrel of brandy to stop it going off until they get to Gibraltar, where they transfer it to a new barrel, and as a special treat, some of the sailors are allowed to drink the old brandy. His body doesn't get to Greenwich until September. They use a sarcophagus previously meant for this guy called Cardinal Wolsey, who died in the 16th century, so I guess it had just been sitting in someone's storeroom for 300 years. The funeral itself happens in St. Paul's Cathedral. He's taken there on a carriage in the shape of his ship, Victory, and in front of it travels Victory's flag, all shot with bullet holes. It is so extra. And to this day, you can go to St. Paul's Cathedral and see his tomb in their crypt. As for our other characters, Fanny is given a generous pension, but Emma gets nothing. Her husband had died, and she's not even allowed to go to Horatio's funeral. In 1813, she is imprisoned for debt. After she gets out, she starts drinking. She dies in Calais in 1849. So why is he on top of that pillar? Well, first off, it's not just in London. There are Nelsons on pillars and statues all over the world. There are dozens of streets, ships, pubs, racehorses. There's even a rapper named after him. Part of it has to do with who he died fighting. The French. Like, we fought a lot of wars against a lot of countries, but at that time it really did seem like France would become not just the dominant power in Europe and beyond, but actually invade Britain itself. So it was, a lot more justifiable than some wars we've gotten into. Partly, Nelson's death was seen as hugely romantic, dying at the very moment of your greatest triumph, with your duty to your country on your lips. Like, imagine if, instead of driving to a fancy hotel with her boyfriend, Princess Diana had died stopping a foreign invasion. That's how popular Nelson was in 1805. Part of it has to do with this story we tell ourselves in this country. Britannia rules the waves. We think of ourselves as a great naval power, and we have done ever since the days of Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh. The same naval power that won the Battle of Trafalgar also allowed Britain to colonise huge, far-off parts of the world, both before and after Trafalgar. Australia, India, Egypt, South Africa, which, for many British people, rightly or wrongly, has been a source of a lot of national pride, especially in the century immediately after Nelson's death. And part of it has to do with the romance of the sailing ship. Trafalgar was the last major sailing ship battle Britain took part in, and so it's seen as the end of an era. The artist J.M.W. Turner would go on to paint the sun literally setting on one of the ships from Trafalgar in an image so central to British identity that it's on the £20 note. And so he's still up there, looking down on thousands of tourists and pigeons every day. And although defeating the French in a naval battle isn't super relevant to who we want to be as a country anymore, he's going to be up there for a long time to come.